In late 1994, Sega released one of their most hated and criticized gaming devices, the 32X. Originally meant to be a stopgap machine that appealed to value-savvy gamers looking to enter the 32-bit generation on the cheap, it was supported for less than a year, saw the bargain bin in record time, and left nearly 1 million Sega fans feeling like they were just robbed of their hard-earned money. Pretty much every critique you've heard about the old 32X is valid and very much true. I won't blow smoke up your ass. It was an ill-timed, ill-conceived, and completely mismanaged product. But like a lot of systems that have failed to live up to expectations, the 32X had some good games. Even considering its tiny library of 40-ish titles, it was easy to pick 10 games that I feel are very much worth your time. Here are my favorite games for the little add-on that couldn't, the 32X. Say what you will about full-motion video games, but Night Trap still has a certain allure and appeal to it all these years later. It looks significantly better than the vanilla Sega CD version, adding to its nostalgia quite a bit. It basically is little more than switching camera views and pressing a button to trap enemies, leaving the presentation to cover the majority of the draw. Fortunately, it's enough to keep you playing far longer than most full-motion video games of the time. The 32X platformer Tempo is one of the best games on the system without question. It's colorful, sounds good, and plays well enough that most people will be able to pick it up and do well right from the beginning. The busy backdrops are distracting, and the stage design leaves a lot of room for improvement, but it's still a good one to mess around with on a system that was starving for similar content. You know how wrestling games could be incredibly fun for no other reason than to bash the hell out of a friend? Well, few wrestling games did it as well as WWF WrestleMania, the arcade game. Great digitized graphics look just like the superstars themselves, and the look and feel is really close to the arcade game on which it's based. It's a strong upgrade over the Genesis original, and a fine fit for the 32X. WWF Raw also got a 32X version, and it too can be great fun with some friends. It sees only a modest increase in color detail over the Genesis version, but otherwise still plays well and has the great 4-player Royal Rumble mode to make it the ultimate party game with your spouse and kids. Don't let the online hate fool you. Once you learn to play it, this is one hell of a fun game. Released with the 32X in late 1994, Star Wars Arcade is the only home port of the original Model 1 classic. There is of course the expected paring back of the visuals. It doesn't have the polygon counts of the arcade, and it certainly isn't as smooth, but for this game to exist mere months after its arcade debut was nothing short of astonishing. The original had been meant to be a 2-player experience, and that has been retained here. The visuals are rather impressive despite the downgrade. It's certainly more than a match for some of the other 3D shooters on other systems like the Jaguar and 3DO. The sound is a bit anemic, and the challenge is unreal. but it's still a great showpiece for launch software. I still fire it up from time to time to get a feel for what the 32X was capable of. Perhaps the most impressive thing about this game is that it was done in a super short development cycle by Sega of America, suggesting that it could have been something special with a bit more time. NBA Jam Tournament Edition was a great game no matter the platform you chose, and the 32X version holds up quite nicely. You get detailed players that scale to and away from the screen, and a fair amount of voice from the announcer, 4 players simultaneously, and a battery backup. With such a small library to begin with, a title like NBA Jam stands out even more. It's easy to pick up and play. Nature quickly endears it to young and old alike. Even if you're not into sports games, it can still be fun because of the over-the-top and simple take on the game of basketball. It's only 2-on-2 and you only need to worry about 3 buttons: a pass, a shoot, and a turbo. You'll be hooked after only a few dunks, and you'll come back for the great tournament mode. The only weakness I can point out here is the rather poor music during gameplay that doesn't take advantage of the add-on's ability at all.
Take back!
Polygon games weren't new in 1995, but 32X games that looked and ran as well as Shadow Squadron here definitely weren't a dime a dozen. Internally developed by Sega CS, this 3D shooter is one of the few games for the 32X that really shows off its potential. The gameplay combines a unique on-rails mode that allows you to concentrate on the shooting, as well as a mode that allows you the full freedom of control of piloting as well as shooting. There are also 2 views to play in, a first and a third person view depending on what you prefer. There are 2 ships to choose depending on your preference of speed versus defense. It very much puts you in mind of games like Namco's Starblade with more gameplay options, so thinking along those lines should clue you in as to whether or not this game is for you. It's known as Stellar Assault in other regions, and there is a sequel to it on the Sega Saturn. In the absence of a legitimate Sonic title, the 32X found itself playing host to Knuckles' Chaotix, a platformer that uses a rubber banding mechanic that ties 2 characters together. Each character has their own attributes and special abilities. The gameplay outside of that remains very much just like other Sonic titles. If you enjoyed those games, most of what is here should appeal to you as well. It's super colorful and sounds great. It's not perfect, however. The stage design leaves a lot to be desired, and the rubber band mechanics can grate deeper into the game. You also get the distinct feeling that this game could have been done on the vanilla Genesis rather easily and with few compromises. But none of that renders this any less desirable if you're a fan of Sonic games in general. I would have preferred to just have an upgraded port of Sonic 3 and Knuckles, but it's still nice to see something a bit different when it came to the Sonic franchise. Using the brute force power of the 32X's hardware, a faithful port of Sega's Superscalar Classic Space Harrier was finally made possible on a home system. There have been many attempts before this on many systems, but this was nothing short of a revelation. The level of detail, color, and overall accuracy to its source material was incredible to see after years of neutered and butchered ports. It even manages to sound incredible, doing justice to the arcade there as well. Basically, you just fly around and shoot things, but its pseudo 3D worlds were always convincing and fun to see. This gave me hope that we'd see a ton of other superscalar games on the platform, and for a time, I was a proud 32X owner looking forward to what the future held for it. The end, of course, was quite the bitter disappointment, but I was lucky to have games this good while they lasted. It wasn't quite as smooth overall as the arcade, but you'll barely notice it while you play. Similar to the port of Space Harrier, Afterburner Complete showed up to try to give us an arcade-accurate version of a Sega classic. The original Afterburner 2 had been done on the X board, an insanely fast and powerful sprite manipulator that no home system could come close to replicating at the time. The 32X version here does the arcade proud in almost every single area. It's just as colorful, remains fast and fluid, and even manages to sound incredible. The only area it shows a major difference is the actual frame rate, where it's not quite as smooth as its arcade big brother. I would have liked to have seen some additions in different modes, but you can't argue with the results here. At a time when the 32X was starving for good games, Afterburner Complete was a godsend. There are those out there that will tell you that Mortal Kombat 2 for the 32X is just a mild upgrade over the Genesis original. They wouldn't be wrong, but what is here is still one of the best home versions of this game from the era. It packs all of the arcade's content into a tiny 32 meg cart. The missing voices from the Genesis version are back and of higher quality. Many of the sound effects are improved, and there are a ton of visual upgrades across the characters and backdrops, and the arcade intro and endings are here in all their glory. The gameplay is pretty much identical to the Genesis version as well, so if you enjoyed it there, you'll do so here as well. Since Mortal Kombat 2 was a disappointment on the Saturn, this remains the best Sega version of this title. It was crazy expensive at $70 on its release day, but I never regret owning it for a second. I wish the music was a bit more akin to the stuff from the arcade, but the funky Genesis generated stuff still held a certain appeal.
Finish him. Scorpion wins. Fatality.
I adored Blackthorne on the Super Nintendo. Cinematic platformers weren't my thing back then. They were often too slow and methodical for my taste. I wanted fast and furious, but there was something about Blackthorne that drew me in. Perhaps it was the gunplay and cover system that often had you playing cat and mouse with your enemies. Perhaps it was the exploration and puzzle elements, or its sci-fi story of revenge. Whatever it was, Blackthorne on the 32X was a great game too. It would get a makeover here that saw big changes to its backgrounds and characters, which some people see as a downgrade. I disagree. This game is gorgeous start to finish with lush detail all over its world and top tier animation for both the main character and his enemies. I wish they had dropped in a battery backup for this one, but either way, this is one 32X game not easily ignored. Internally developed at Sega, Virtua Racing Deluxe is a showpiece of what was possible on the 32X with a strong group of software engineers. They set out to make an accurate port of the Model 1 powerhouse, and for the most part, they exceed and then some. It is a major improvement over the previous version done via the Sega Virtual Processor, running at a better frame rate, higher color, and with additional content. The 2 new tracks equal a total of 5 available places to race, and you even get some new cars. The end result is a very playable, very impressive home version that remains one of the system's better games. The music could have been a bit more present while racing, and the difficulty can be rough for newcomers, but this is without question one of the better efforts on the 32X. Had Sega concentrated all of its energy on games like this, the platform may have been a lot more appealing to the masses. Coming out nearly a year after the Saturn home version, Virtua Fighter is nothing short of a miracle on the 32X. How could an arcade game powered by the Model 1 come home so well on hardware that lacked any inherent ability to accelerate polygons? It runs fairly smoothly, has great color, suffers few of the glitches that marred the Saturn release, it sounds pretty good, and most importantly, plays extremely well. Sega developed this internally and made sure that it showed off just what the 32X could do. Unfortunately, it was too late for it to do much help, and the series' lack of popularity outside of Japan only meant it came and went with little more than a whimper. Hindsight allows us to appreciate it a little bit more, and if there is one game you need in your 32X collection, it's definitely this one. You may be wondering if there are any games I recommend you absolutely stay away from on the 32X. Even with its tiny library, there are definitely a few that I feel offer absolutely no value in playing. Games so bad that you feel less a person after wasting your precious time on it. Let's take a look. Do you enjoy immediately wrecking right off the starting line? What about gameplay that has you bouncing all over the track like a damn ping pong ball? Do your ears just love being assaulted with screeches and scratching that'll bring you to your knees? Well then I recommend Motocross Championship, the dirt bike game of choice by masochists, created by sadists. You'll not find a single game on the platform that equals its level of pain and suffering. If you liked Pitfall the Mayan Adventure on the Genesis or Sega CD, well then the 32X version is gonna blow you away with its stunning 20 frames per second presentation. That's right folks, just when you thought this game couldn't get any better, the 32-bit version comes along and gives you a third of the frame rate for your hard-earned money. Why play in glorious 60 frames per second on other weaker platforms? Fighting games like Street Fighter II and Mortal Kombat had nothing on Brutal Unleashed above the claw. Why play games that had coherent hitboxes that made sense? Brutal here leaves you guessing whether your attacks are even going to connect, offering a fantastic sense of suspense and mystery. And you know how you can actually see your fighters in other games? Why would you want that? Brutal Unleashed gives you large foregrounds that obscure the action, making sure that you can only partially see what's going on. Leave those other games for the amateurs. A real martial arts master fights with his mind, not his eyes. All joking aside, the 32X does have a solid list of playable games in its small library. The appeal of these games are really going to boil down to your stand on the platform. If you have nostalgia for it, you'll want to play these versions to remember some of your favorites, or maybe recall some of the games you really wanted for it. If you never cared about the 32X, you'll want to play better versions of these games on other platforms like the Sega Saturn, MAME, or a modern system like the PlayStation 4. If you're just looking to see how these games fared on the 32X, most modern Sega emulators play them just fine. If you collect for the 32X, these are definitely games you need in that collection, though some of them can be expensive. As I said in the beginning, the 32X deserves every bit of history's disdain for it. It never really had a chance, and it was nowhere near powerful enough to compete with the machines released immediately after it. It left a horrible stain on Sega's reputation as well, and was yet another add-on for the Genesis generally perceived as a failure in the eyes of the gaming masses. Looking past its unfortunate history, it does still have some gaming curiosities from the era very much worth revisiting. I'm Sega Lord X, thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you next time.